So now I want to invite my colleagues Robin, Ed, and Ani. We're going to have a really fun discussion around a lot of these topics. Robin's going to guide us through a couple of questions to set the stage, and then we'll have Q&A.
So you heard the research. We thought we'd spend a little bit of time talking together about finding a team and then growing the team. You know, we happen to have some coaches who are with us who have actually scaled teams kind of beyond the first stage, and then many of us have gone through that initial stage as well. So maybe we can just actually go quickly around, just really briefly. I know you've heard the same from people, but just kind of who you are and what company you've done, and or what, you know, kind of you pick what you want your backgrounds to be.
Sure. Iskaira, the founder of LaborX. We call ourselves the LinkedIn for the linked out. And we're a talent marketplace for people who go through boot camps, vocational programs, community colleges, basically an alternative to the 4-year degree. Because at least in the United States, 2/3 of our workforce doesn't have a 4-year degree. I started my career after I graduated college working in startups. I was working in education startups. And at one point, I was managing a team of 300 people across the US. And scaling from 1 person to 10 people to 30 to 300 in less than 2 years. A lot of growing pains. But what I found made me successful, and I was the highest performing director in my company, is because I use very non-traditional ways of finding talent and getting talent on board. When I realized that, I had that epiphany that, oh, not everyone I need to hire needs to go to college, needs to go to MIT. MIT is a great place. But there is talent everywhere. How do you find that talent? That epiphany is what made me start LaborX. So I went from my experience having this real big pain point of scaling a team to 300 and getting really creative on how to do that and thinking, wow, I'm succeeding, but my peers are not succeeding in the same way. Let me build a solution for other people like me. So that's how I got to my business.
I'm Ed. Originally out went to university and studied engineering. I joined a startup that grew a bunch, and I came on as employee number 20 or so. Ended up growing and managing people with that. Moved to London and opened their London office. Went to Sloan really with the purpose of starting a company. First company I started, experimented with a bunch of different companies. Started a company, Klaviyo, that we do the email marketing and ads for a large number of e-commerce stores. I have grown that company to about 200 people. Now I'm on the board. We're kind of eyeing to keep growing that a bunch, and started that with one other guy. It was not a problem we were aware of at all when we decided to start a company. We spent a long time doing. We're really seeking a big problem to solve and found a very specific one, and then over a period of a year, and then solved that. And then most recently started another company that's about 7 people. The first company's bootstrapped. The second one I raised money called The Hiring Engine. We focus on helping employees find labor for jobs that don't require college degrees but still require some skill.
I'm Ani. I think all the stats from Iskaira makes me want to go back to LTV. It's so much easier than talking about teams. My background is computer science and finance. I got my start in high school. Started making some websites for some family friends, and then that sort of rolled into, we had about 20 developers between US and India, just doing back office IT stuff for lots of small, medium-sized businesses in Chicago, and sort of got the experience that, hey, this isn't so hard. You can start something and sort of, work on it bit by bit and grow it bit by bit. And then I joined another sort of medium-scale company that in healthcare IT that was scaling very fast, and that was exciting. But I think I learned there that my strengths are really on the startup phase, not in the growth phase, and I should get fired once we hit the right size. It's not today. So then I got a chance. I went and tried something else in San Francisco on peer-to-peer consumer finance. It didn't work out. It wasn't the right timing. Didn't have the right team. Then I moved to the Philippines. I got an opportunity to work in the Philippines to run a chain of dialysis clinics for low-income patients, and that what sort of shifted me from working on tech startups to how to use tech to have more of an impact, as all of us are. And then went to Sloan after working on that for a couple of years and turning around those clinics. Again, with Ed like Ed said, with the intention of, okay, I really want to find the right team and the right idea. I actually had 4 different teams and 4 different ideas running in parallel when I started in business school, and I think that's perfectly fine as long as you can contribute. If you can be an effective contributor on multiple streams at the same time, it helps you understand which idea has traction, which team has traction, where you find the funding and the financing, because it's not just about having a great idea and a great team. It's also being in the right sector at the right time when the funding is available in that. So I wouldn't really look at it as cheating on your teams. If you're looking at multiple ideas, I think it's perfectly fine for a certain set of people to do it that way. And then we met Lindsay and David, my co-founders at MIT, in class, and then we've been growing it. About 250 people now in the company, and about 80,000 people using our network of toilets. I don't know, what else you guys know? That's it. Yeah.
And I'm Robin. In college, I studied econ and international relations. I had a job in finance consulting and other things that were, not entrepreneurship. But at the same time, a group of friends and I started an educational social enterprise right out of college, and that ended up forming a lot of my passions to go into it, and also for me to try to always remember that if I'm not doing something that was as exciting as that and as rewarding and meaningful as that, I should probably switch and do something else. I helped after Sloan. I joined a technology company. And we took the company from private to public. We went all the way up and then all the way down. The founder, there's a question about whether he left voluntarily or not. But when he left, a group of people who really enjoyed working together left with him. They ended up starting another company together. I didn't want to participate in that one, but we still wanted to work together, so they ended up being my principal investors for the startup that I'm doing now. So as you can see, there's a pretty wide variety of experiences here of how people got involved. I think we all actually talked a little bit about how we found our team. So that was kind of my first question. When you're thinking about co-founders, what's important to consider? This is kind of one area that I want to talk to you about. What are the important factors? And how do you suggest that boot campers should prioritize them? I'm talking about things like trust, competencies, ethical fiber, track record. What are the things that you guys thought about? And Ani, if you want to start and move it back over.
Well, I don't know if we definitely didn't have this much sort of training or background on it, I think, when we were starting up, but over experience, I would definitely say that you should look for a complementarity of skill sets. If you guys all know how to do the same thing, that might be cool in the beginning when you're trying to get your first prototype out, or get your first bit of money in, but after that, somebody has to do the other bits, that Bill talked about, sort of the different roles. So don't build teams that are all homogeneous, whether that's background diversity or skill sets would be one. The second is expectations. We had a lot of drama in our early days on, we've had people that were with us in the beginning that no longer felt there was the right fit for them. We no longer felt they were a right fit for the team. All of that stuff happens, and it's important to have those conversations. And we can go later if there's questions around sort of questions on equity and how you divide things and so on. But these can really stretch relationships. So make sure you have those conversations early and everyone's on the same page on what roles what roles are we playing now, and what do we see doing in the future? How is this a lifestyle business, or is this, growth at all costs business? All of these things can really bring a lot of stress, and keep your focus away from building the business. Not to say ethical fiber isn't important, but that just didn't necessarily come up as the main topic.
Guys, sorry, can I ask you to be intentional with the mic?
Yes. Is that good? That better? It might, is that better? I can kind of shout, that's fine. So I would say that the first time I did this, there's, as Ani said, thought about it, but didn't have the freedom to be that intentional or didn't know enough. And then, as I was on the board of that company and started new and tried to take all the learnings and do it, I think the number one thing, having been with that first co-founder for years and still having us very tight at the hip with a lot of just real big things in our lives, the number one things is ethics, honesty, and trust, because startups are a marathon. So a lot of things are going to happen, a lot of unpredictable things that you never thought you'd see in the world. And the thing that made it that one easiest for me was just knowing that I felt always at the end of the day I could trust him. And we might have had a lot of emotional challenges and a lot of frustrations, but I never was trusting whether or not he was ethical or he was lying or anything like that. The second thing that I think can be really important is incentives and knowing incentives and outcomes. So knowing why someone is doing things and knowing what outcome they want. Because startups are long and because things don't always go well, and because a lot of the decisions you make, whether or not to take investment, the types of business you're going to solve, are going to affect the ultimate outcome you may have, it's really important to be aligned on those things with your partner, or at least to very much understand where they're coming from. Because then you'll know, is one person just trying to do this to get a really good job next? Or are they trying to make $1 million and then they want out? Or are they trying to build a giant company and no matter what happens until this is public, they won't back off?
Did those things stay the same?
No, and all those things change. People's lives change, they have kids, they learn new things, all those things change, but if you have addressed them up front, then there's a moment where people have to comment that they've changed, I think is the main thing. So know that they'll change, but the more you can kind of plan for, well, one, definitely ethics, but two, just knowing what you want out of it is incredibly important. And then just the final thing is making sure that it's having the perfect set of different skills is great, but at the end of the day, as long as people are happy with the role they have and want to do their work, and that you can evenly, divide that work and they'll take on what they can, that's key, because you can't, all the work has to get done, so you've got to divide it up.
So echoing on what they said, I just want to give examples of how that played out with me. So I went from working at this startup that was very high growth and having this big team of people, but I was hired and I was promoted, and I hired this team, right? I didn't go out to build this team. So I went to Sloan, and I was like, okay, now that I'm going to go, I want to start my own company. Very intentionally, let me go to business school. Let me meet people who are interested in the same things, and let's go off and start a company. And I was very naive and very hungry, and so I did that the first semester I got there. I started going to all these hackathons, pitching my idea, and a classmate said, oh, there's this guy over at Harvard who, like you, is really interested in education, or the education to employment space. You two should meet. And I was like, great. So we met. What I knew from him is he was an engineer, trained as an engineer, was in business school, also interested in starting an ed tech company. We're like, great, let's go. And then by my second semester, I took a class basically where we went through this book and all of the lessons. And we had already made so many of the mistakes that the research here says to avoid, that it was too late to correct. By the time we got to a year, I had to fire my co-founder. And here were some of the things. So complementary skill sets. At a very high level, I said, I'm a salesperson. I came from, making $25 million for the last startup that I was at. So I'm the hustler. I'm going to go out there. I'm going to talk to people. I'm going to sell. He's an engineer, so he's going to build things. he's either going to code it, and if he doesn't know how to code, he'll learn to code. And if he doesn't learn to code, he's going to manage, he'll be the CTO and still manage the engineering team. And very quickly, what I realized, so actually not very quickly, 8 months after working together, we got to the point, it's like, okay, we actually need to split. We need roles very well defined. We had a hipster on our team, and we had a hustler. But it was vague what he was. So he wanted to be a hustler, but he didn't like to sell. So he's like, I want to be the CEO. I just want to go out and pitch, but I want you to do all the selling. I'm like, okay. Then he's like, well, okay, then I'll manage the engineering team. And so he kept not thriving in his roles for a couple of reasons. The main reason was communication. So he didn't, the hipster was very clear what his skill sets were. He was designing, he was making things look beautiful. I would go out there and try and get people to either give us money or, sell something. And he was conflicted. He was an engineer who went to business school to develop his sales skills or whatever, his business skills. But he didn't communicate that to the team. He was growing really frustrated. He wanted an executive title, so titles really mattered to him. We got the advice that there should be a CEO so that we know who's a decision maker, but then everyone else, you don't need a CTO or COO, because what are you CTO of or COO of very early on? This person could be an engineering lead. This person could be a design lead. That was some of the advice we got, because then people get really attached to the roles, and if they're not functioning, you got to fire them. Then feelings get hurt. So sure enough, I was taking a class with Bill, New Enterprises, basically this over a semester, and we got to the founder issues, and I was like, Bill, what do you think I should do? And he's like, it sounds like both of you want to start companies, and so you should probably be CEOs of 2 different companies. So go and have that very tough conversation with your co-founder, and I did. And it was, very painful, but he felt really happy after. He was like, you're right, I do want to go and start off, but admitting that to himself and to the team for him was really hard. So anyway, I give you that context to let you know that aside from the complementary skill sets, which we didn't have the conversations early on about what's our incentive, why are we doing this? I wanted to make the world a better place. He wanted to be CEO of a disruptive company, whatever that meant, and what I learned from there is that the number one thing I value the most is radical transparency and effective communication. So, I'm going to respect however you're feeling, but I need to know how you're feeling. I can't, waiting a day, a week, a year to kind of tell someone, you know what, I've been doing this, but I really don't want to do it. Or I just wanted to support you, but I'm not really passionate about this idea. You're doing yourself a disservice and your team a disservice. So as I've gone on, and I pivoted from that initial idea to LaborX, I've been looking very, very intentional about finding the complementary skill sets, about being really clear about why you're motivated. It doesn't have to be the same motivation, I've learned. Some people want to build cool stuff, and that's okay. And some people want to save the world, and that's okay. I think so long as you're really on the same page about what that is, that's what I've learned building my team.
So I want to spend some time talking about growing the team beyond the co-founders, but why don't we spend just a brief amount of time on the point that Ani brought up, since I think it just still does make sense in this context. Not so much about what's the perfect equity split and that kind of stuff. I think there's, you can go read as many blogs as you want on that topic, but more around how do you think about your incentives and the incentives of the other people you're starting out with, and what's the ways to have the conversation, and how have you made sure that people were aligned? If people were misaligned, then what happened? In a little bit of kind of reality of it. Yeah.
So very quickly, for me, now the conversation that I have with folks joining my team is, what do you want? How much do you want to make? Do you want equity? Do you want, or do you want salary? And what I found is some people, they're like, I don't really care about the equity. I want to have a very stable salary because I have a family, I need to pay childcare, I have bills, or I want to contribute to this, but, salary is what's really important to me. For other people, I'm really to go all in. I'm happy to just take a, like minimal salary to just pay my rent, but I'm in it for the long run, so I'm okay just taking equity. And when we get to the equity conversation, what's someone worth, in essence, is the conversation you're having. It's a very tough conversation to have. But when you center it on contributions, on what the expected contributions are, not only today, but over a 4 or 5 year period. So, at a minimum, it takes, 5 to 7 years for most companies to have some sort of event, whether it's you're going to collapse, you're going to be bought out, or you're going to IPO. And so you need to define those incentives for the long run. So sure, if we think, your contributions are going to be worth 20%, you're going to earn that 20% over a 4 year period. You'll learn about vesting and cliffs and all that, but really setting the long-term vision, because there are a lot of famous examples of companies that are around today. You do that equity split, and that person then stops working, they still own half of the company. And so earning your equity share with your current and future contributions is how we have that, at least the equity and compensation conversation. And then very bluntly early on, what do you want right now? And that can change over time, but just really kind of having that open conversation.
Great.
Yeah, I would say the main thing is just knowing that it's going to change. With my first co-founder, we were very well aligned about the outcomes we wanted when it started. I think the more and more it grew, you end up just answering questions, just new questions, and you have to openly address them. I mean, even if you vested your equity, which everyone should always do, if you find yourself 4 years in and the company's very successful, and there's no more, and you have all the equity, you probably, and one person's wants to run this company for 30 years, the next 30 years, and one person doesn't want to devote their life to this, you probably end up having a conversation. So you end up having a lot of big conversations over time, and so the key thing is just to not let them fester, and just to make sure you readdress them. With having done that, been through that once, the main thing I think I took to doing it the second time was being much more intentional at the very beginning about exactly what we would do at various outcomes and how people felt about it. And I think I then had the context to say, okay, well, what if this happens? What if this type of investment comes in? What if we're this size and someone offers to buy the company? And just could run through those options and found out that, I'm not on the same page as one or two of my co-founders on a couple things, but by laying that out ahead of time, we now have the common understanding that I can circle back to, and we can every 6 months revisit that and just see where we stand. And as long as we're having that open dialogue, it's okay if some incentives are different, but it's really helpful in understanding motivations and what people are thinking about.
To add something different, I agree with all that, but to add on to that, we all come from some sort of business school background, and we live in a little bit of an echo chamber in terms of startups and VCs, and so we went into the discussion thinking that everybody else was starting with that same knowledge. The concept that equity split is not based on past contribution, but future contribution is not intuitive for everyone. So I think it's important that before you have that conversation, all of your team members are reading from the same book. So whether that's, you guys all read the same, like making sure everyone's reading the same blogs or books or whatever it is, that even these concepts of how they're widely done, because I think when we had this conversation, some of our teammates had a big sense of betrayal that there is, that they're being cheated when, then because the concept of, we have whatever it is this organization is so far, we just split it equally, and that's not. That is definitely one perspective of it, right? But that's not how the industry works. If we do it that way, you significantly reduce your chances of actually getting external funding because you've taken all the wrong steps. And doesn't align with how the fund investors are looking at companies, because they see lots of risk in people already having, owning X percentage of the company with no restrictions for them to leave at any time. Nobody's going to put money in. So in one way, there's this moral conversation on like, well, what's fair? The other is like, how are you setting up your organization, your company to succeed in terms of financing if you do the wrong things? So especially if you have other people on the founding team that are not coming from these type of contexts where this is new to them, please make sure that they're well educated before you even have the conversation with them, so it doesn't seem, so they know that you're coming from a good place, you're coming from a fair and equitable place when you're having this conversation. And the other place where we had trouble was if you have co-founders who are always comparing this to, well, I could go to Goldman Sachs and get something else. I think that is a really hard dynamic to go. If you're doing this with the sense of I'm sacrificing something to make this happen, it will always be there will always be a sense of resentment. And I don't think that's even a conversation worth starting, right? We made a conscious choice that we will not go do recruiting when we're in business school because that puts a different level of pressure on everyone saying, okay, here's an offer from McKinsey or someone else saying, here's what the salary is, and oh, look, here we're getting $10,000 instead of $100,000 from that other place. And that, I think, adds to more stress. You should have a conversation of, okay, this is not a comparison of, well, I could get something else here. Why are you, and trying to make this match that? That's just not how startups, at least for us, that's not how it worked.
Thanks. So I thought we'd actually now switch gears, and talking about growing the team. Ed, we had another conversation that is recorded that you guys can all take a look at around when to hire, right? Like, how much do you do yourself first? Is it a good idea to delay? How long do you delay? Why delay? And then what are the signs that it's time to now take a look at like growing the team?
Yeah, so my experience on this, and also strong personal belief, is that if you can generally wait to hire and do more things yourself, do. So co-founders are a bit different. Having a co-founder provides emotional benefit, psychological benefit, helps you get started. But in terms of adding that first employee, you have to for some businesses. But if you think about all the PMR this week, if you think about changes to your problem statement, if you think about all the questions you still have about your business, all of that information, all those things, the more you learn and the more you keep doing, the more likely that the ultimate business doesn't look like the business you currently have or the problem that you're currently solving. And what that means is if you go and hire somebody, first, you have to pay their salary. Second, if you do decide to change the direction, you may have to either fire them or you keep them and you keep spending money you don't necessarily have because their skills all of a sudden are in a mismatch with the thing you're trying to do. So whether you like it or not, as soon as you start adding paid other people to the team, and even as soon as you grow the founding team to a certain size, it pushes you down a path of being less experimental and less questioning with your ultimately with your persona, with your problem, and ultimately pushes you into a specific solution because you now have a team that matches that solution. And then finally, it's just at that point, your ability, because you're paying them, you're literally running out of runway as you spend money. So in general, there comes a point where you absolutely have to hire, but if you can delay that as long as possible, in most cases, there's a huge benefit. Are we taking any questions now? Sure, keep talking.
I'm inclined, guys, to just like do a couple more questions up here, and then like let it be open, and you guys can come in, if that's okay. But we'll try to keep that part short so that we can get to your questions. I promise. Iskaira, what do you think? What are your thoughts? Like, do you agree, disagree? Like, what
I agree, and I again want to share some examples and context as how I did it. So I am a non-technical founder. I'm the hustler of my team, and we lost this hacker initially, and so it was a designer and I for quite some time. And actually, what that did for us is we realized there was so much we could do without having to write one line of code. And it's actually, it was wasted energy and money and other things if we rushed to build a solution. And so what I am really good at is talking to people. And so I talk to people. I talked to 100 people. I talked to 200 people. I did, I put together a survey, and I didn't send it to people. I got on the phone with them, and I asked very open questions and jotted down all that information so that I can come back and look at patterns. So that was my customer discovery. I was very diligent about the way I did that. Then I just started drawing things myself, right? I could draw on a napkin. I could draw on Sketch. I could do screenshots, walk people through, okay, if we built this, would you use it, and how would you use it, and, where would it work? And we actually, not necessarily by design, but because we lost this, this hacker, we're forced to do that. And I actually think it really forced us to talk to way more people. So our PMR is off the charts. But also to uncover truths that weren't self-evident. We thought we were out here like solving this problem. And then we kept hearing over and over, like, here's my real pain point, and here's where I want to spend my money, and here's what I'll give you money for. And so after like slowly doing that for a long time, over and over, then we built a very crappy, ugly, buggy MVP that we put out there. And guess who the first company who used it was? It was Google, which blew my mind. I was like, oh my God, I have this really ugly prototype. And Google is the first company that says they want to pilot this. I had 10 candidates there with like video resumes that I had done. So I went and, developed their stories, and we got a camera and we shot their videos and helped them build a digital portfolio. And I go and I get this big meeting at Google with like 5 recruiters, and I'm demoing with these candidates who are in the Bronx, which is where I grew up, and I'm now in the Bay Area pitching to Google. And I was like, I'm trying to sell them on the vision. I was like, and I can come do this in the Bay, with local talent. And they're like, actually, that guy you demoed with sounds really interesting. Can we interview him? And I was like, oh my God. They interview the guy. He goes through like 5 rounds of interview. But what that proved to me is that I don't need like a super well-featured, beautiful, 10 engineered, product. I had a very ugly, clunky something that Google was the first company that said they wanted to try. So that was just, very eye-opening for me. And so what we then did is we went through sprints. It's like, okay, here are the set of assumptions we want to go test. Now let's make this a little prettier. Now let's focus. And we had one big rule. We're not going to add a feature to this product if it doesn't make money. So if a customer says, can you build a button that says buy, then we were going to go build that button. But if it didn't necessarily lead to revenue, we weren't going to jump to like build 1,000 features. We needed it to be validated. And so we took our time. So I think that forced us to realize that, we didn't have to go build, and we could just ask a lot of questions.
So it sounds like your growth and your hiring, like unexpected twists and turns in your growth path ended up leading to a different hiring path than you otherwise would have expected.
Yeah, sorry, can I borrow yours? So wrap one more thing up. And then where we are now is I have had to learn a lot of skills myself. So I taught myself how to be a product manager. Like I realized it was going to be not worth it for my team for me to learn to code, but I could learn how to be a product manager, right? So I was doing personas, I was writing specs, I was, prototyping, and then the designer on the team would mock something up that was good enough to get us going. And then I realized, okay, after I've done this 10 or 20 or 30 times, now that I can't do it, like I'm being stretched thin and I can't handle all of the customers coming to me or all of the design stuff, now is the time for me to go add someone to the team, because now I have a tried and tested process that I can train them on, and with the expectation that that might change down the line when we get to our next inflection point. But I had to like stretch myself and learn to do a lot of new things, and after I did them and I couldn't my capacity was stretched, that was my cue to like, okay, now let me go find someone.
One just quick thing to build off that, I think exactly what Skylar said, like one key benefit of that is if you do it yourself and you write the specs for what someone's gonna do, if you're then scaling that team and you're managing 5 or 10 people who is doing this, you have a very good sense of the skill sets you wanna hire, and you have a very good sense of what people should be doing and what makes a good candidate. So it's uncomfortable, but in the long term, you're building new skills and developing new talents, which is gonna be useful for the rest of your life, and at the same time, it gets way easier to scale the team later because you've actually done it.
Ani, do you have some thoughts on this? All right. I do have a series of questions on kind of scaling, but I actually think given the conversation so far, maybe it's a good time to open up, and maybe if those trickled out, then we'll go back to that. So questions from boot campers? Yeah, go ahead.
So I had a question about hiring. I totally agree with you that putting somebody permanently on the payroll is just running out of runway. But what are your thoughts on short-term contracts, or perhaps utilizing student resources? For example, TNT here has an internship program where students work for you for grades. What's your thoughts on those?
I suspect we're going to have different opinions on this, so this will be a good one. I personally think the co-founding team should do everything they possibly can themselves, even if they don't think they know how to do it. So, at the latest company, I was doing all the design work and learning some new programming languages, and it's not like I've programmed in 10 years. The finance, the accounting, the problem with student teams, I think, or my personal problem, is that no one's as committed to the project as you are, and so your speed of iteration, if it's not on the team, is much slower. And so the more you can do it yourself, the faster you can iterate. And I think sometimes you can get overly focused on quality and outsourcing and managing other people and get not used to doing the work yourself. And you really just need to be iterating fast and producing it. So I think I've always find if it's outside the team, you end up wasting a lot of time. And it's better just to figure out a way you can do it. If you can't build the prototype, great, then you figure out how to draw the picture. Then that'll just ultimately let you move faster because you're doing it the way you actually can.
Yeah, I agree with Ed. I mean, I'm not so hard on students. We've actually we use interns quite a lot. We have about 40 or 50 interns a year, and we use them effectively. But you need to give them something that's strategically important, but not operationally critical. That your next day isn't going to fall apart if they disappear on you. There's also a lot of overhead with bringing on short-term people. You got to sell them. You got to onboard them. You got to sell them the vision. If you're just giving them, here's a spec, write to that spec, you're missing a lot of context. You don't get the best out of people, right? So you have to help them understand the whole business, and that's a lot of your time. So it really depends on the type of business. But I tend to agree with that you can always re-engineer your MVP to be to de-risk your business by proving out a different set of another one of your assumptions with the co-founding team. So a lot of people, I think, tend to jump to saying, I need to build out this whole app to prove it. But that your app isn't, most of the time, not your value proposition. It's the functionality or the service that you're delivering via your technology that's the value proposition for your customers. So how do you prove, if you're not a hacker, then how do you prove it offline? So I'll pick on one from last year. So they wanted to connect Australian beef farmers to high-end butcher shops in London. And they said, okay, we need this much money because we need to build out this app that will let people sign up and put theirs. But actually, you don't need to do any of that. You just need a person with a phone calling the beef farmers and calling the butcher shops in London. And just fake it till you make it. Just prove the value proposition that these people want to be connected and they want to be paid. Then you automate, and scale up. When I was a kid, automation, came at the end after you proved it out because it was expensive. Now, because it's easy, everyone's like, oh, that should be the first step. I'll sort of give another example that from your guys' teams, just on the top of my head, that I think one of the teams is doing a bracelet for travel angels, right? So, one way of executing that might be, okay, we're going to spend a couple $1,000s developing this bracelet. The other way would be, doesn't really matter. We're just going to sit there and have people on the phone and advertise a phone number saying, hey, if this happens, or, you can, there are lots of offline ways of proving what you're doing instead of hiring and building out a whole product. and then wait till you actually prove your value proposition, know what your feature set is, and then hire the team to build it out.
Thanks. Let me just give you like a short, concrete example of where I did hire a student, or I did bring on a student, and it went really well for me. So I found someone who was a marketing and psychology major. She was doing a co-op program, which means her degree that she was getting was part kind of practical, part like academic, right? And so she had had a series of like work experiences. She was really excited just to work with a brand new company, and was thinking about whether or not she wanted to do in the future. So that was where the interests kind of aligned. Sometimes what you find is when people are really curious and like innately curious and have and you can kind of sense that they're interested in what you're doing. Taking a small bet, like I think I would echo what Ani said, is like you're allocating a piece of work to them that you have to do, and maybe you've done a little bit of, but that more needs to be done. In this case, it was actually helping me better estimate my cost of acquisition, and doing a little bit more work on competitive environment by like testing a bunch of competitors out. Which are things I knew I should do, right? We're talking about PMR, but I was just so busy I couldn't. It wasn't going to kill the business right away if I didn't do it right away. But I thought, let me just see how this goes. And at this point, given the excellence of her work, like the moment she graduates, I hope I get to try to hire her. So I think opportunistically it can work. And you got to really evaluate whether it's going to be a distraction for you. Or not. So any other questions? I think back there. Yeah, go ahead.
And I would like to challenge the fact that you said delaying the process of hiring is good. With two examples from very different sectors and very different business sizes. When we were doing the team that I joined as someone in a startup, what happened was one of the founders was doing a lot on his own from the tech side of things. But then he's done so much that now that he hires, the knowledge transfer is so high that when that person leaves, you end up with half-baked products. And that happened once, twice, and we currently still have so many loopholes and so many products that are half-baked because the knowledge transfer was so heavy that it was very hard for the person who's just come in to take over so much. And so from the student side of things, there's Udacity China as a business, operates with 80 employees and has the highest international revenue, the lowest operating cost internationally in Udacity businesses. 80 employees, out of which 57 are interns, student interns. So is it good to really delay that, or how is that?
So talking to the second example, like I have totally different view on if you're like an existing company with scale and whether or not you should hire interns and build a system and rely on them. Like I think that's a great idea. So I would just say that's a great example of actually, if you're a bigger company or even a company of 50 people, yeah, that's totally different. It's really just for the first, literally first couple employees. I would say that if you're the first couple employees, I think the key thing, the red flags in your statement where you said there's multiple products and with holes in them, and it's like, well, why, if this company's not profitable yet or not at the point where you're really driving success, like what's going on with there being multiple products? So I think there is a redundant, over-reliance on one person, like absolutely might be the reason that you go higher, and that's real. So I think that's a good point. You want to do that, but you also want to try. The right answer in that situation might be just do less. Only focus on the one product that drives value, and we're just doing too many things. Because at the end of the day, money's going to be what lets you stay alive, and you just need to spend as little money as possible.
Yeah, and I think part of the challenge is when you raise money, if you have the money, it is really easy to throw it at bodies and people to start building all sorts of things without getting real market validation. When you have very little, you're forced to not spend it, and so you have to really be focused on why you're building, why you're spending this $1. So, sometimes raising a lot of money, a lot of companies who raise a lot of money quickly burn through it and fizzle out because they're not being disciplined about really focusing and getting customer validation.
That is such a real comment. I'm feeling that right now. I have so little money and I have to watch every dollar of it. Yeah, go ahead.
So you spoke about area of focus and having worked with people together before you form a group. So, and then we have blended learning and modular education coming in, being popular. So in this context, do you think that course projects should actually be designed around areas of focus to actually drive more of such kind of team formation?
Are you talking about in education? So should projects?
So, for example, a bootcamp or a single 1 week course or a 4 week course.
I have a very strong bias to experiential learning. So I think it's great to learn frameworks, but if you're not applying those frameworks and actually doing projects together and learning these team dynamics that are going to be the number one reason why your teams fail. So the answer is yes. I do believe that, you know, every course out there should have a component of, of experiential learning, of there's actually an output to whatever it is that you're learning.
You and then right behind you. Sorry.
Should we hire by potential or by the ability to get work done fast?
Great question.
I think it 100% depends on what you need, what the role is and what the business needs. I mean, your job as co-founders, your job is to prove out the business or find a problem, find a solution, and get to profitability or get to the point where you can scale that. And so you're really making a bet on for that role, what do you need? And some roles you can hire in potential. I think that's amazing. It can really pay off in the long term. Some roles you just have to have the skills right away. So it just very much depends on the situation. Yeah.
It also depends on your cash. I mean, experience comes with, costs you money.
Yeah.
Can you afford it?
And also the expense of managing that person. So if that person has more potential than actual skills, what is your bandwidth to manage and build that person up? So that's a real cost.
And a source of frustration, potentially, right? So.
My question is regarding funding. We have been told that it's better if you don't ask for it early on, so that you develop yourself and then get it later on. But my question is, how do you get through the early stages? How do you stay afloat? Or do you get money?
Maybe each quickly say how we
Ed
did it.
doesn't ask for money. I ask for money all the time. So. I want to know how to do it without money.
I mean, I've done it two ways at any scale, which one was, I mean, you save money and then you live frugally and you don't spend it and you seek out free food. You just stay alive. You do everything you can to stay alive and then you try to get customers to pay you, and that potentially means shifting your problem until customers are paying you. Because if you're really desperate, you're much more eager, you're much more willing to change your solution. Even if you think you have the right solution, but you have to stay alive, you're willing to change it. Second times I raised money because I could, and just focused on only doing it if I got the exact terms I wanted from the people I wanted. So if you get to that point, if you can get money on the exact terms you want, yeah, do it.
I think different teams have different realities, and so you need to be aware of what the realities of your team are. I think some people can go out there and move back into their parents' homes and literally live out of the garage. They don't need to pay rent or any of that. But for a lot of us, that is not a reality. You need to pay rent. You need to eat. You need to earn money to sustain yourself. And so acknowledging who has the privilege to do that is important. If someone on your team doesn't need to get paid, I've seen teams where you address it head on, but it's like, you know what, I don't need to get paid, so I'm not going to pull a salary, but you have kids, you have childcare, you have rent, you're going to get paid a certain salary. So first, I would say, figure out what the needs of your team are and address those needs, because some people do need to get paid from day one. And so on that note, I set a rule for myself that I need to be validated financially. My idea needs to be validated financially, right? The best validation is from my customers. If someone's willing to pay me to build it out, great. But if not, there are other ways you can go and build, your first a couple of hundreds or a couple of thousands of dollars without giving equity away. I was in that position where I knew I had a clock. The minute I graduated, I needed to make money and I needed to pull a salary. I didn't need a very big one. I lived very frugally, but I needed salary. So I went, I submitted to 100 competitions. I pitched everywhere. I asked for grants. I asked, I got fellowships, things that actually bought me the first 18 months. So I was able to get a fellowship for the first 18 months, which is when you really got to figure out what it is you're building. You may not get, your first customer by then. So I got very creative and found some money. But I didn't take investment money. These were people who, I went to competitions based on the topic that I was solving, right? There are a lot of pain points around hiring or around helping certain people get jobs. So I would find those opportunities. And when I got $1,000 or $3,000 or $5,000, I stretched the heck out of that money. I made it last a really long time. But I also knew, I was like, you know what? My idea has to be good enough for someone to believe in it. And it might not be a VC right now because it's very early, but I was able to get grants and foundations that helped me pay my rent and eat, even if it was rice every day. But yeah.
I also want to maybe make a slight, I'm not sure if this is what your question was going to, but make a slight differentiation between your needs to kind of earn money yourself, be able to keep yourself afloat versus getting your business, validating things so that you can get your business ready to either be ready for a customer or to be ready for other investment. And so for the first one, I think a lot of the comments resonate, a lot of people just keep their day job for a while, or pick up other types of project work or things like that. But for the business, remember that a lot of things that, there's a lot you can do that doesn't cost that much money. You saw it this week, right? Think about some of the activities that you guys did. A lot of those things don't cost money. Iskaira's example earlier about, we lost the person we thought who was going to build something for us, and that forced us to realize that there's a lot we can do with napkins, right? Napkins are free. So I don't know if that was what your question was, but I just wanted to make sure we address it that way. Let me go over to this side because I think I'm neglecting. Let's go here and then we'll go in the back.
Just curious, you said that you didn't take any investment. I was just curious because you said you didn't take any investment money. Is there a special reason?
Yeah, so let me be very specific. I didn't take dilutive investments. So someone giving me a fellowship is investing in me and in the idea. I just didn't have to give them a part of my company for it. So I did take investment money, but not the type of money where it was convertible debt or equity. I didn't have to give something in exchange. They just were really invested in me solving this problem. But I did turn down money. I did turn down investments. There were a couple of accelerators that, I was eyeing initially, and, they wanted to give me, I don't know, $5,000 or $10,000 for 10% of my company, and that math just didn't work out for me. Some accelerators can add a ton of value for you, and others don't. And so, or sometimes it was an investor that we were value aligned, and that was very painful for me to be like, I haven't raised any money, and so how can I really sit here and turn down money? People might think I'm crazy, but at the end of the day, I was like, this person has, we're just not aligned, and they're going to force me to make decisions that are going to cost me a lot more, not only in money, but in mental and spiritual. It's going to make me want to quit, and so if they want to make sure that I go this way and and not follow the impact that I want to have in the world. So I was in a position very painfully early on where I turned down money either because I didn't feel like I was getting the value for the money that they were giving me, or because we didn't have the same values for the company and for the business that I was trying to build.
In the back?
How do you keep your team motivated, particularly when things go really? Shitty was in the promise statement. I've got it.
The beatings will continue until morale improves. I really don't have an answer for that. You got to have a resilient founding team that they know what's coming, right? I mean, I mean, you guys have experienced the ups and downs this week. It's just going to be even more higher ups and higher downs if you're going to do this. And if you're not ready for that, if you don't have the grit for that, then it's fine. Don't do it. There's no shame in saying, like, look, this really isn't my cup of tea. So make sure that you have the right team. We also struggle often between, as a startup, you are always constantly running out of cash, right? And we always struggle with how transparent do you make that to a staff member who's has lots of different other priorities versus, because you want to be honest and open and have them engaged in the business versus not stressing them out that they're going to be about to lose their job in 3 months, because we're always going to run out of money in 3 months. But that's the whole point. That's why we're here, is we're going to raise that next bit, right? We need to stay focused on those milestones. So I don't have a good answer for you, but you need to, other than, you're going to trial and error team members. We've lost a lot of team members who didn't want to deal with that stress. So that's okay. Let them go.
I mean, I guess the way we did it the first time was mainly we could just committed to starting a business to each other, me and my co-founder, for a couple years. And so it was honestly just kind of constantly shitty in some way. Either we were adding customers and I was staying up all night because they're in the wrong time zone, or we weren't. And it just kind of sucked for years. And then there were times when it was just deeply boring. So I think it was just the commitment that kept us going. And same thing, yeah. So it's really just commitment to getting through it, and then trying to pull back and trying to maintain exercise, personal relationships, a relationship with each other, and approach each other on a personal level about what's going on. But it does really suck. Yeah.
And you hear this cliche that startups are like marriages and your co-founder is like, a spouse. This is, it could literally be your spouse. But I actually, in this particular issue, I actually think it's really true. And so in any relationship, you're going to go through ups and downs, and some people come back and recommit to the relationship. They're like, why did we fall in love in the first place? Why are we doing this? Like, why did I choose you and did you choose me and we decided to set out on this? And so when times get shitty, I think having that recommitment to the vision, like why you set out to do this, could be really important, and can, and at that point you can realize that it's time for someone to move on and for another not. So I ran out of money for the first time since I started this. It's been a month and a half, and I was losing sleep because I thought I was gonna lose this amazing team that I already have. And when I told them, they're like, it's all right, just let us know. And we have contracts, right? They're just being delayed because they're government contracts and they take forever. And I hired someone who knew that I had no money. And I told her that, and I was like, listen, I ran out of money. I have this much in the pipeline. I have these contracts signed, but I think you're the perfect person for this role. And we had worked together already, and she's like, well, I think this is the perfect role for me, and I'm just, I'm going to hope that money comes in quickly. And she started today. So in very shitty times, I feel like when people recommit or commit to whatever it is that you set out to do, have those check-ins and conversations. It's like renew your vows to your startup.
And just to build on that, the other thing that we do is we actually go back out in the field to, like, we started this for a reason, right? And you quickly lose touch with your customers once you start working on other things. Go back out in the field and understand, okay, reconnect with the impact that you're having, whatever that business might be. Again, it doesn't have to be a social enterprise. I think every business has an impact of some sort on their customers. And we lose touch of that quickly after the PMR. I think most of us don't talk to our customers on a day-to-day basis.
I would just also add, like, that things are not going to go well already, like from day one, right? In other words, like you guys experienced this a little bit this week, right? Like, you don't know when things are going to go wrong or who they're going to go wrong with or why they're going to go wrong, but you expect it to happen a little bit. So starting from the beginning, I found in a way where you find other ways to relate to your team beyond like the specifically just the goal of what your company's about, like showing respect for their development, showing respect for their, voice. Like their voice isn't always going to carry, and you're not going to make decisions, but if people feel heard, like these sorts of things. The other one that I'll just give you an example of something I did poorly is when you're talking about the startup, like when you're communicating the way you talk about the business, especially around your team, just be careful about that, right? Like, and the example I'll give you for me is, I think even someone said earlier today, like their crappy prototype. So I went around calling the thing that I was working on the crappy prototype. And in my mind, what I was setting for myself was, well, I have something that's more of an MVP, but I want to get there, and so I have an interim step. But I wasn't saying interim step. I was saying crappy prototype, and I was saying it kind of a casual, offhand way. And I got some feedback from a team member who told me, hey, like, you should rethink whether you're going to call it that, because there are people who work with you who are working on that crappy prototype, and no one wants to work on a crappy prototype. And so I immediately I was like, oh God, you're so right. I didn't even realize I was putting that out in the world. And and you're not, right? Like you're gonna have blind spots. And so hopefully you have some people around you who are gonna tell you things like that. And I know that's not specifically what you asked, but it came up and figured I'd talk to you guys about it. I'm also gonna take the person in the way back over there.
Have you ever considered personality profiling in order to bring somebody on board, especially at the highest level, and what effect did it have? Was it effective, or should you ignore those types of categorization?
Very quickly, doing it the second time, spent a lot of time. Like, we did the Myers-Briggs and just like talked about it a bunch, and like values, and just spent like a whole day going super deep. It was incredibly useful.
Can I add something to that? So, I think the personality tests are a tool, should not be a hiring criteria. Because personality tests do not tell you how emotionally intelligent a person is. So, you can have a very people skill this, and you can have a very it's very different. So I would suggest use it as a tool to get to know your team, but don't decide I'm going to hire only these. That doesn't work.
In the back as well? Yeah, yes, you.
So you guys have all given us some great tips, and I keep hearing you guys mention how hard it is, and we all are aware of that, but what is the one thing you would each say to us around dealing with your mental health in your personal lives to stay grounded throughout the process?
Life is long. You can start a whole bunch of startups, so preserve your mental health, your fitness above everything else. I mean, hopefully you can start 8 more, so that's all way more important. It's a really good call. It's just like way more important than this, and almost always this is probably not the end-all be-all. So figure out a way to prioritize mental health, physical health, family, the things that make life really important.
I go to therapy once a week. I can afford it, and that's my privilege, but I do it because I know it's important, and this is like the worst time to stop, right? Even if it's hard to afford it.
Having lived in New York City, I grew up in New York City, I worked in finance, and then I worked at a really high-pressured, high-growth startup where we worked basically I slept maybe 4 hours every day, and that was, kind of what you did. I emerged from that experience really burnt out. Tremendous growth, tremendous impact, but I decided that I never wanted to work like that again. You lose really good people. You fracture relationships. At least that was my experience. And so what I realized is that there are times that I'm going to have to do that. But that can't be the culture that I set for myself and for people, because that's not a sustainable culture. So when I started, this company, I was very intentional about setting boundaries and having people tell me what their boundaries were. So some people, turn off their Slack or their phone or all their notifications, and so don't send me emails in the middle of the night unless something's burning. And so figure out what those boundaries are for you and for your team, and honor them. So for me, you know, I tell my husband, my family, everybody, I need to disappear like once a month by myself and go into the woods and just be alone in nature. Like that's my therapy and that's my privilege. And so that's kind of how I cope. Or, you know, I need to go boxing and like punch something and get all this steam out. Those are the ways I cope. I don't do therapy. I do boxing and I hike and camp. But not just with your team, but also with your family, you know, like the people who are in community with you, just make sure that you draw those boundaries, you respect them, and you respect other people's boundaries.
Yeah.
So, this, I think this is very important. What we're doing this week here is not how we suggest you live your life. And let's be very clear about this. Like, sometimes you need to do this, and there's something about the learning experience that increases once you feel like you're at risk and that you're growing, but like, this is not how you should live your life, this is not how we recommend you do it, this is not like how companies are built. You do need to sleep, you do need your loved ones to, you know, take them there and everything, so let's be very clear about that, this is not how we recommend you live your life.
I also want to say, like, I don't believe that every business you found has to be like that it has to be a social enterprise or, you know, something that, you know, is purely a passion. Like there are plenty of businesses that, you know, people have started that are very fulfilling, that aren't like didn't start necessarily as a passion project. But I will say that for me, there are definitely days that I go through when I think the thing that I happen to be working on that day or the thing that we're building that week is like the worst idea I've ever had. But the problem that I chose to, that I want to tackle, like I feel a strong personal connection to it. And so that is kind of what gets me through like that period sometimes. That and then the people I work with, so. Yep, go ahead.
So on one side you've got very excellent talent and you have company values.
Who, me personally? I don't have excellent.
So while hiring for a startup like on a mid-level, it's been there for a few years. On one side, you know, you've got really talented people. And on the other side, you know, you have your company culture and company values. Now say a very talented person comes, but you know he won't sort of fit in. What would you do in this situation? And I'm not talking about talented jerks.
Yeah, tell me what you mean by fit in.
So, like in the current startup where I work, it's a little bit, things move a little bit slowly, but the person who's coming in expects things to, you know, move a little very fast. And because of that mismatch, even though the guy is very talented, he may get things done, but, you know, he may feel a lot of the heat and mental pain and all of that. So how would you avoid that? And how would you integrate someone into your company culture and values, of course?
So, great. So actually, why don't I take that question and maybe broaden it a little bit for the panel. We've got a couple minutes left. So for onboarding, right? So take that specific context, but then make it a little bigger. Like, what do you do to onboard, you know, new hires? So people who didn't start out with the founding vision, et cetera, and, you know, are coming in later. You've screened them. You've made them an offer. They've said yes. They're coming in now. You know, what are the things that happen that you think are important in that period?
So, in his case, I would definitely pick culture over talent. I think if someone's not, I mean, obviously you need to have an honest conversation of where that mismatch is, and maybe some people can switch their mind frame and how they work. But even after that, if it doesn't work, I would let go of a talented person for the sake of preserving the culture in the organization, because the culture is there for lots of other reasons more than, you know, not just, you're not laissez-faire just because you don't want to get shit done. It's there because you have lots of other, maybe work-life balance or whatever you guys have, right? So I would definitely prioritize culture over talent. And in terms of onboarding for us, you know, it's different for different organizations. For us, with 250 people, I can't, or Lindsay can't necessarily be involved in every single onboarding, but when it's...
So what have you guys set up for, I mean, what, yeah.
I wouldn't say we're doing it very well, but it's a typical onboarding process. We take people through sort of the history of how the organization started and what's our purpose, what's our mission, what's our values, how does your role connect to that mission and values? So how does your contribution help us achieve that, then we ask people, most roles, they have to spend some time out in the field with our customers so they understand the process, especially if you're going to be mostly a back office role where you hardly ever meet customers. It ebbs and flows. I think some people feel really connected, some people don't. Also, for all new hires, we do one-on-ones, like we at least do one-on-ones with them, even though we may not do the whole onboarding. Either Lindsay, David, or I always do one-on-ones so that they know that, look, like we know you're here and we think you're a valuable part of the team, and we want to listen to you, and please. So just building that personal relationship. What else? And then we sort of try to put them in cohorts so that they sort of feel that mission together with others. We also do a lot of propaganda in terms of getting people together and having them talk about why they're here, which I think reinforces, because everyone's like, oh, they're all here for the same reason as I am. So this is not just separate. So you got to do a little bit of that brainwashing when you bring someone in. But I don't. We do. It hasn't been like okay, here's a strategy, let's execute it on a piece by piece. It's been a lot of mishmash over time.
As the person who hammered that I just don't think you should be hiring, I would say don't be hiring. And just, you don't have to worry about onboarding because you're not hiring. So.
So I want to give a different perspective on culture. Instead of thinking of culture as something that you set and people have to fit into, I see culture. Sorry, I'll come back.
So Ed, like, that was funny, but I also know that at your other company, it's a 200-person company now. So as you got further towards that stage, what were the things that you think were important for people?
So I think if you find a solution and solve it well and generate a business where people pay you and you get to the point where you're sustainable, right, then you have to hire people and you have to get really good at it and you have to get really good at onboarding them. So it's just a much later step. But the number one things there is just know that most of the work is not being done by you at that point. And the first few weeks of a job are incredibly memorable. And so really setting that tone in line with your values and in line with the culture and is instilling, what your incentives are and who you are and what you want people to be thinking about and what's important to you is just really important. And so things we try to do is really show our appreciation in the first couple weeks. Keep in mind, express how excited we are to have someone on the team, to talk about our values, talk about how we think about performance reviews, talk about the history of the company, talk about the milestones, make sure everybody knows their names. So it's just really investing, and especially upfront, because if I think back to all the jobs I've started, I remember that first day really well. And those things, play out over years.
I think the point that you said on fitting in, if you've anticipated that this is going to be a problem, then you have a chance to handle it. But if you make the decision, I don't know that your specific situation, right? But if you one thing to consider is not making it like a binary thing. Do I hire them or not? And just like you saw here at the boot camp, you were put on a team with people from really different backgrounds. I don't know that necessarily you would have said at the beginning of the week oh yeah, we have a really good fit on this team. So, same things that we've been talking about in terms of well, then try to figure out what is their incentive. And then I would advocate, and not everyone would say this, but I would say have a conversation with them, and try to address it. Or if that's not really feasible, your team's gonna have to make a judgment, and the judgment's gonna be based on limited information because you haven't really worked with them a lot yet. But do your best to kind of figure that out. And the choices may not be, well, if it doesn't fit, why don't they fit? Is that something that has to do with your team being too homogenous? Or is it just, there are definitely sometimes situations where it doesn't fit, and then you got to address it quickly. Don't let that fester. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so in which cases you hire someone and in which others you outsource, let's say marketing or law?
I think it's probably context specific, but in the last 30 seconds, I'll just say, if there are things that are really core to what you need to do, that you have to, stop doing because you're getting pulled onto other things, consider whether you want to bring someone on kind of full time. And then the other is whether you hire full time or not is kind of a judgment call. Okay, I think we're counting down the last few seconds. So I know you have a lot of other questions, and you can do your best to kind of grab coaches if they don't run away too quickly. But I want to respect the time and let you guys get back to what you're here to do. Thank you, guys.